Well, hello and welcome everyone to Explorer Classroom. My name is Gina Borgia, and I am so glad you are joining us for today's special event. At National Geographic, we know the power of exploration, wonder, and storytelling can change the world. This Explorer Classroom YouTube show connects students around the world with our National Geographic Explorers for short lessons and time for your questions. Today, our explorer is Paul Salopek. Paul is a writer and journalist who has traveled to more than 50 countries and has earned most of America's top print media awards. Paul is currently on foot retracing the pathways of the first humans who migrated out of Africa for a decade-long storytelling project called the Out of Eden Walk. Since his journey began in Africa over a decade ago, he has walked over 7,800 miles. Paul is joining us today live from the trail in Shanghai, China, and will provide an update from his recent 1,242-mile journey through China, from Yunnan to Sichuan. But before we get into today's lesson, let's welcome our viewers who registered in advance and are joining us today from around the globe. Our shout outs for today's episode go to Creekside High School, LB Clark Middle School, the Coates family, Cool School, Barker Middle School, the Sharma family, Bell High School, Stuart M. Townsend Elementary School, Edison Middle School, the Out of Eden Learn Network, and all of our homeschools out there. We are so thrilled to have you here. And with that, let's get this Explorer Classroom started. It's time to turn it over to Paul to share his update from the trail. Take it away.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Andre, for helping set this up. It's great to be back on Explorer Classrooms. For those of you who are following along, welcome back to the trail, as it were. For those of you who are new to the journey, welcome to the project that involves walking through the world over the span of many years and many thousands of miles, basically to recreate the ancient journeys of our collective ancestors who first dispersed out of Africa way back in the Stone Age. My name is Paul. As Gina said, I'm talking to you from China. I've been on the walking trail now for more than 9 years. Started in Africa, the mother continent to all of us. What I like to remind all of my audiences and my readers is that if you go back far enough in our family tree, we're all African. And let me just start out because I want to leave enough time to hear your questions and to answer your curiosity at the end of our session before it's over. That's often the funnest part, is getting your questions. So let me just get started by giving a brief description of why I'm doing this. So, and then we're going to update everybody about where I am and walking through the landscapes that I'm moving through right now. So way back 10 years ago, I got this idea. I was a journalist. I was a foreign correspondent who was traveling around the world, covering all kinds of stories for newspapers. And I got this idea that after a while, after I've done that for many years, it was a very rewarding career, very interesting life, because I got to poke my nose into all sorts of events around the world, whether it was environmental stories or stories about culture, stories about public health, stories about politics, economics, you name it, anything under the sun. After I did that for quite a few years, I began to think that maybe I was missing something. Despite all my travels, despite going to, as Gina mentioned, more than 50 countries, despite, traveling by airplane, by ship, by train, by helicopter even, everything but parachuting into stories. I thought maybe I was missing something between the stories. And let me just explain. So let's say you're a reporter and you're covering Africa the way I was. I lived in Africa for 9 years. And you are working story to story. So one week you're working on a story in South Africa, maybe about music. And then the next week you're getting on a plane and you're flying to the country of Nigeria to write a story about the oil industry. And then 2 weeks later, you might be on another plane flying to Kenya for a national election. After doing all this moving around, again, a wonderful privileged job to have, I began to think, what am I missing between story A and story B? I'm flying from one kind of hotspot or one interesting story to another, but in between there are literally thousands of other stories that I'm not able to explore, and that the people who live inside of those stories aren't getting their voices heard, right, around the world. And then I began thinking even more deeply, saying, well, what if it's true that the stories that are unheard between story A and story B are even more important than story A and story B? What if I'm just following kind of the most conventional path of telling stories in these nice little categories of politics, economics, health, war, what have you? And the really important stories of our lifetimes, the stories about our lives being connected across all of these subjects, are being missed because I'm moving too quickly, because I am too focused on one story or another story, because I'm not slowing down enough and listening enough to know that all of these stories that I've been writing throughout my career are somehow connected, right? That the health story is connected with an education story somehow, or that the war story is connected to a climate change story somehow. So I decided about 10 years ago to kind of step off the airplane, step off the bus, step out of the taxi, step off the train, step off, indeed, the helicopters, and basically put on a pair of walking shoes and begin walking the earth through all the stories that are out there that are more or less invisible, because we're moving too quickly, we're moving too fast to see them, we're flying over them, or we're driving through them on a superhighway. If you get out of motorized vehicles in today's world, and some of you know this from your own lives, when you walk to school as opposed to taking a bus or being driven to school, or taking a train or whatever, you see more. You just simply see more on foot. You're walking generally between 2 and 4 miles an hour. You're hearing things as you're walking along. You might hear pieces of conversations from people walking by. You might smell something that's being cooked in a cafe that you're walking by, or the houses you're walking through. You're feeling the environment on your skin, the sun and the shade, et cetera, et cetera. So you're more alive. When you're out walking, your body is switched on, your senses are switched on, and you're just engaged more with the environment. And so I thought, why don't I take the lessons of being more awake that come with walking and apply them to my career, which is storytelling, combine them, storytelling with walking, and move across the surface of the world, seeing how people are living across the earth in different countries, in different subcultures, in mountain ranges, across rivers, across borders, indeed across continents. And basically allowing myself this enormous luxury and privilege of taking this incredibly valuable thing called time to tell stories more deeply, to basically spend time with people's lives, days or even weeks, as opposed to driving up to their villages or towns or cities or homes and doing quick interviews and leaving, just spending a matter of hours. I thought that would improve the quality of my storytelling. And at the same time, on a very personal level, it would help me understand how the world is put together and how our lives are interconnected more than ever. So I needed an idea, kind of a map, because that's a very big, complicated project. It sprawls everywhere. I mean, I could walk to Europe. I could walk across the Himalaya mountains. I could walk across the Amazon rainforest. Each of those routes has hundreds of little stories along the way that are actually big stories, right? That are just not being heard or seen. So what I decided to do, because my background is in science, I was educated as a biologist, is to use the science of genetics and the science of human origins and the science of human migrations to rewalk the pathways that all of our collective ancestors did when we first left Africa and spread across the world, and use that deep history, use that ancient trail as a distant mirror to compare about our present world and the world that we've walked out of so many millennia ago. So Gina, I'm going to walk through the slideshow at this point. if you want to project, I'm going to take you guys, kind of go big from the global scale of the walk to bring you up to date to kind of the micro scale, the daily scale. So I've titled this little a slideshow. I'm going to focus today on China, but let's get to China, right? Let's get to China first before I walk you through China. So next image. So here's the map of the original walking route, the one that I had planned from 10 years ago. The idea, as probably many of you know from your science classes, is that humankind, Homo sapiens, our species, evolved in Africa and then began spreading from Africa across the world to various continents, mostly on foot, but also using sea craft, as we'll get into in a minute. So I thought, okay, let me talk to scientists and find out where some of the oldest Homo sapiens fossils are. And there are several sites in Africa. And I decided to use one in Ethiopia called Hertoburi that has ancient ancestral bones dating back about 160,000 years. And I thought, okay, I'm going to use that as my starting line to walk not just across continents, to walk through time. I'll go to kind of year zero for the species, right? So I started in the Rift Valley of Africa and began walking along these red lines. And so far I've walked, I don't know, I honestly, I don't keep that close of track anymore, but I think it's about 13,000 miles over the course of the last 9 years. I walked out of Africa. I took a ship across the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. I walked through the Arabian Peninsula, through the deserts of Saudi Arabia, these kind of mustard orange colored sand dunes that went as far as the eye can see. And I used camels to carry water through those desert landscapes. I walked through the Middle East, through Jordan, through Israel, through Palestine. There was a war going on in the country of Syria that some of you may have heard of, a terrible war that blocked my way. So I couldn't go any further through the Middle East. I had to take a cargo ship to Cyprus, an island in the Mediterranean, and another cargo ship to a country of Turkey. And then I walked through all of Eurasia, all of Turkey, Georgia, touched a toe in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then through Central Asia, walking basically the old Silk Roads towards China. And so from Central Asia down across the Western Himalayas into Northern India, and then into the Southeast Asian, the tropical country of Burma, also known as Myanmar. And then finally now, I think I'm on country number 19 in China proper. And so eventually, once I walk through China, the idea, as you can see by this red line, is to walk north through Russia, through Siberia, and then take a ship across the North Pacific to Alaska. And then the last several years of the walk will be occupied walking down the western side of the American continent, from Alaska through Canada, through the United States, Mexico, Guatemala, Central America, South America, and then the finish line down in the very bottom is the very tip of South America called Tierra del Fuego. And there, I picked that as my endpoint because that's what archaeologists and anthropologists say is one of the places on the continents that we kind of ended our journey on foot way back in the Stone Age. We kind of ran out of land to walk on, right? People reached down there about 7,000 years ago at the very tip. And that's just an eye blink. That's just yesterday in the history of our species. So we just got there recently, and that's where I'm headed eventually. So Gina, we'll move on to the next slide to focus now on where am I now and what's it like to be walking through China. So I forgot, there's a slide here about this is the starting line. This is in Ethiopia, one of the cradles of humankind. And what you're seeing there is an anthropologist, a paleoanthropologist, a fossil hunter, holding up an ancient stone tool. That, believe it or not, that's a very high technology piece of equipment. If you go back 80,000 years to the Mesolithic, that's a very sharp blade made by very clever people who knew how to make these beautiful tools that were as sharp as any of today's razors. And they would use this to process animals, to get, to get meat, to get food to kind of eat. So that's that you can see there, that's the desert landscape that I kind of started in Africa. And then now, next slide, jumping forward, I'm in this country here where we have the next slide, in China, right? And then now China is huge. It's going to be so far the biggest country that I've walked through. And you'll see that I started down on the Burma or Myanmar border, down on that kind of corner in the lower left. And I'm basically doing a line all the way across the middle of the country to the Russian border up at the very far north. And this is 3,000 miles, about, gosh, it's going to take about a year and a half. And I'm going to be going through at least 10 different Chinese provinces. And I don't know what all of you know about China, but China is so big and so diverse, with more than 50 different ethnic groups, that this is going to be like walking through a continent to itself. Walking through China for the last 6 months has been an eye-opener for me. It's my first time in China. And even walking through that southwestern corner, down in the corner of that map, has been extraordinary to me. I was meeting different kinds of people, hearing different languages, and many different landscapes, as we'll see in the next photographs. So let's take a look at some of these landscapes. Next image. Gina, are we showing the next image?
I am, yes. There's water and a structure with a bridge. Okay. You're seeing that?
Okay. No, my screen is frozen for some reason. It might be a bandwidth issue. So you're just going to have to tell me we're on the next image.
Okay, will do.
All right. Okay, so there it is. It finally showed up. Okay. So yeah, what we're looking at is a pagoda, a beautiful ancient structure. And this is in the foothills of the Eastern Himalaya Mountains in southwestern China. This is outside of an ancient Silk Road trading town called Lijiang. And I just like this picture because it's classically beautiful. It shows kind of how old the culture is in China here. These ancient trading routes that I'm walking through southwestern China are in some cases more than 2,000 years old. And here we have an image of a couple of my Chinese walking partners going through the backcountry. You can see how it's quite rugged. It's quite a bit up and down. This is about, the elevation here is about 5,000 feet. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide, Gina, the one that has people walking in it. Okay. So what I might do, Gina, just to kind of, I'm going to draw up the PowerPoint off my desktop because it's taking too long to get the
that sounds good. Or I can just take your cue. As soon as you start speaking to the next image, I'll make sure that it's up. I was just checking with Andre. Yeah. He's not experiencing a delay, so it looks like our students and audience will be following right along with you.
Okay, great. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so, and you're gonna have to kind of, in that case, remind me what the image is of. Okay, so it's a little, because I don't remember. So
it's teamwork.
Yes, indeed. So there should be a photo of a couple people walking along kind of a ruddy red landscape.
Yes.
Right? And that is walking through the northern part of Yunnan province. Let me see, I'm going to try to minimize this. Excuse me 1 minute. Yeah. And let me do this. Yeah, okay. So you can still see and hear me, right, Gina?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, so on the next image, let's move on. There's a picture of a beautiful jade-colored river, right? Let me know when you have that up.
It's up.
Okay, so this is the this is the upper reaches of the famous Yongsan River, one of the big rivers in China that flows down to the seas. And this gives you an idea of how diverse China's ecosystems are, right? You have here kind of semi-arid hills that look almost kind of like a Mediterranean climate, and it indeed is. Also very biodiverse. You've got up to 5,000 different major plant species here. This is a hotspot of biodiversity, and botanists from all around the world come to study the plants here. It's got amazing potential for things like ethnobotany, things like medicinal plants that might be able to help us as we move forward, finding natural cures for human diseases. So I walked for quite a long time along major river systems like this. Many of these rivers are dammed in China. China is a big dam building country, generating hydropower. So, and that includes this river too. This river is among the most dammed rivers in the world. Next image should be of a chap in a snowy landscape.
It's up.
Okay, so how do I do this? How do I kind of set out across the world on foot? How do I even know where to go? How do I know where to sleep? How do I know where to get food? How do I know just not to get lost, right? The answer is I rely on people. I rely always on walking partners. These are local people who agree to join me for periods of weeks or months, who know the local landscape, and who, as they walk with me, are able to share something about the history and culture of their home. And so the story then becomes not just mine, it becomes the story of everybody who walks with me. And this is one of the great gifts of the walk, is that it's now become a shared journey. It's not just Paul's walk across the world, but it's, in this case, it's Mr. Yang Wendo, the gentleman in this picture, who walked with me for hundreds and hundreds of miles out of Yunnan province into Sichuan province. He's an ethnic Bai minority living in southwestern China. And he was deeply enriching to have along on the walk. And I ask everybody on the call to think about, on the video here conference, how your experience would be if you walked through a strange town, for example, near you, alone, a town that you didn't know very well, versus walking through that town with somebody who lived there. Think about how those two differences would be radically different. On the first hand, if you walked alone and you didn't know the way, think about how much you'd be missing. You'd be missing where there might be interesting waypoints along the way, kind of scenic sites or historical sites. You may miss where the best place to get lunch is. You may miss where the best park is to rest. So by having local walking partners join me all across the world, and I've had dozens and dozens of them, ranging from camel herders in Ethiopia to photographers in Turkey to alpine mountain guides in China. All of these people bring their knowledge of their local landscapes to the walk and make the entire journey so much richer. It's no longer like a solo piece of music that I'm singing, it's a medley of voices. And this community of fellow walkers is growing and growing and growing. And I hope to bring them all to the end of the trail when the walk is finished, including Mr. Wendo here, fly them all down to the tip of South America, so that by then we'll have hundreds of fellow walkers from across cultures, across countries, across languages, and walk together to the finish line at the tip of South America together, because the walk now truly belongs to them. It just doesn't belong to me anymore. So up here, Wendo is walking through almost a 15,000 foot mountain pass in the mountains of Sichuan. You can see how snowy it is. So in China, again, just to give you an idea of how incredibly diverse the human and natural landscape is. China, you think China, you may just think big cities, bustling technology, they're the workshop of the world. They build our computers, they build, our electronics. That is only one piece of the China story, guys. That is just, and I would say that the beauty of the walk is I'm able to explore the vast panorama of other stories that involves everything from farming to conservation to cultural stories to the village life, people who are still traveling these back roads, sometimes still by horses. It's a China that you just don't see much anymore on the international stage. So it's been a great privilege. Next image.
That's up.
Okay, so what we have there is a representation of some of the people that I'm following, whose footsteps that I'm still following on this journey. So I've just told you that for the global journey, I'm following the first ancient peoples who dispersed across the world. Those are ancient hunter-gatherers who moved, a few kilometers a year, maybe, right? And it took them 2,500 generations to kind of migrate across the continents and populate the world. I'm doing it in a very abbreviated time span. But here in China, to give you an example of how rich the possibility for history and culture and storytelling is, I'm able to do research about Chinese ancestors who migrated and dispersed across China proper. I'm able to read their stories that are centuries old, or hear folk tales, or see archaeological sites, and try to tell their story as I'm seeing modern China through my own eyes. So what you're seeing here are sculptures of ancient tea porters. These are men and women, and sometimes even children, who were carrying enormous loads of tea from Sichuan province in Western China to Tibet. And these people often walked barefoot. They sometimes carried well over 120 pounds of tea on their backs on journeys that lasted many days. It was a really tough lifestyle. And so I was able to do some research and follow their footsteps through the mountains. And one of the stories I'll be writing will be the Tea Cargo Trail, trying to honor these people who did such enormous work as recently as a century ago. Next story, next image, excuse me.
It's up.
So what we have, I also run across not just examples of ancient wonders and ancient travelers, but also modern walkers too. And here's a woman who is walking along a busy highway in the province of Chengdu, pushing a cart, and she was walking to Tibet. She had decided to quit her job. She wanted to have more meaning in her life. And she decided, you know what, I'm going to walk, I think probably close to 1,600 miles to Tibet. It was kind of her personal form of pilgrimage. So when you're out walking in the world, you meet people who might occasionally be doing similar walks. And it's like a community of brothers and sisters, right, from across cultures who've discovered the power and joy of walking. Next image.
That's up.
So what we're seeing here is a tea picker, and this is just from a couple weeks ago. I was walking through the hills of southern Sichuan and found myself coming out of those snows, those kind of very high altitude alpine scenery that you saw a few slides back, into tea country, through these very vibrant greens, these greens that are almost bright enough to burn your eyes out, incredibly vivid greens of tea plantations. And we spent several days, my walking partners and I, stopping in these tea plantations, picking tea with the tea workers to kind of get an idea of what their lives were like. This woman was earning about $20 a day, picking premium teas that would be sold for many hundreds of dollars per kilo. These are very exclusive teas, and we were able to, you'll be hearing about her story coming up soon. Next image.
That's up.
And here we have an example of how this walk project, the Out of Eden Walk, is a journey not just across miles, not just across borders, not just across space, but through time. I make a focus of my work to seek out the elders in the communities that I walk through, the people who are some of the oldest folks who might live in a village or a town, because they carry with them memories of a rapidly changing world, right? The world that you students will be inheriting, everybody on this interaction, on this video call, the world that you're inheriting is changing more quickly than at any time, probably, than any previous time in human history, going back hundreds of thousands of years. So what is locked inside of the head of our old people, our grandmas and grandpas, is very valuable because they carry with them knowledge systems about how the world was before it became overtaken by cars, before it became crossed by electric wires, before it became united by airplane flights, and by now by the internet, right? They have traditional knowledge systems that are different than ours. And I think they're valuable because as we walk into the new century, we may need their help and their knowledge help to remember how to do very important things about, for example, how to conduct agriculture, how to grow things, and yet still preserve nature, still preserve the forest, still preserve soil systems, still preserve river watersheds. And guess what? These old folks have all of that knowledge that's been tried through hundreds of generations of trial and error. They have this wisdom in their mind that once they vanish, once they walk off the stage of the planet, it's gone. So I think part of the project for me has been to talk to older people. This is an 89-year-old ethnic Pumi woman who was born into what globally would have been the Middle Ages. She was born into like the 15th century in this very remote part of China, where at the age of 7, she was betrothed in a child marriage arrangement to a grown man. And by the time she was 12 or 13, she was already working 10 or 12-hour days in the fields, pushing animals around like goats or yaks as a shepherdess, and also carrying big loads of corn to the local landlord because her family was very poor. She was from a landless group of people, and her parents had to devote a certain amount of their harvest to the man, the rich guy who owned the land every single year. She had these amazing stories of carrying these big baskets of corn up over these big mountains that my walking partners and I had just crossed. And it was hard to imagine that a young girl could do it, carrying 60 or 70 pounds of corn on her back. She had amazing stories. Her mind was very sharp. And this is her grandchild in the picture, who is now born into a world that all of us share now, and that the world that all of you students will inherit is a world that's digitally connected like never before. So the chasm, the gap of knowledge between her granddaughter and the grandma is enormous. It's like they have lived in different times, centuries apart. And part of the walk's idea through storytelling is to weave them together so that we can learn from each other's stories, even across this canyon of time. Next photo, excuse me. I just wanted to throw in, you can't talk about walking through China without talking about food. China is a country of foodies. Everybody here in the smallest hamlet, the smallest shepherd's hut, to the fanciest restaurants in cities of 25 million people are very interested in food. Food is important to people's life here. It's been explained to me by anthropologists, Chinese experts and historians, that that's kind of part of a collective memory because not too long ago, 3 or 4 generations ago, China was undergoing major famines where millions of people died. And so there's an appreciation for food that comes from a collective memory of very desperate hunger. So it's been one of the great joys of walking through China so far is to be able to sample the different cuisines of China. And it's been amazing. It's been just a treat. It's like walking along a 1,200 mile long buffet table, eating with farmers every night or eating with yak herders or eating in small mom and pop cafes and villages. It's been amazing. Last image you can go to.
Alpha.
So what we see here is my walking partner. This is Liu Kankan. She is a book editor. Just to give you an example of how incredibly diverse my walking partners are, she edits books. She walked with me over very high mountains in Sichuan into a remote ethnic Tibetan area called Muli. And what you see, I just wanted to end on this image to give you an idea of the horizons ahead. China is so immense. China is so big that these horizons are like mountain range after mountain range after mountain range after plain, after desert, after giant megacity after megacity. So right now I'm talking to you from one of the biggest cities in China, 26 million people, Shanghai. And the beauty of walking is being able to integrate and knit together all of these landscapes in a very human way, in a way that I have time to think about transitions between giant cities and beautiful remote wildernesses like this, through forests that still have bare that still have deer, that still have even snow leopards way up at the very top. So if there's one thing I want to leave you with at the conclusion of this slideshow, is just to think about how, when you move quickly and you read quickly or you view videos quickly, if they're short videos, if they're TikTok, if they're YouTube or whatever, that shortness is convenient, but it also is deceptive. Be careful, because it doesn't present probably a true picture of the complexity and the variety of life of any particular place. If there's one thing I wanted you to take away with from these handful of slides, these handful of images, is just how incredibly diverse a place like China is. It is not monotone. It's not the same from place to place. It changes. It's almost like many different countries wrapped into one. Just as probably many of the countries that you belong to have regions with very distinctive dialects, distinctive cooking. China is just the same. So that has been one of the great gifts of the walk, is to be able to discover human diversity in all its rich colors. So I think, Gina, I'll leave it there. And looking at the time, open it up for any questions that the students, teachers may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that incredible presentation. We have so many questions, so we'll try to get to all the ones that we can. So students, if you are watching out there on YouTube, please send us your questions in the chat bar. You only need to send us your question once. We record everything you send. And teachers, please let us know who's asking so that we can give your student or your class a shout out. And if you're up here on screen with us, get your nice loud voices ready. We'll be coming to you really soon. Okay, our first question, Paul, is how do you communicate with the folks that you meet while you're walking, since you've been through so many places?
Yeah, that's that's the best question of all in terms of the biggest difficulty. If people ask me about what is the hardest part of the walk, to be really honest, it's not the heat of the desert. It's not running out of water in the middle of the Kizilkum Desert of Uzbekistan. It's not those snowy mountains of southwestern China where we got cold. It's language. If you don't speak the local language, you really miss out on so much. You only get a fraction of what is happening in people's lives. That's one reason why I walk with local walking partners, because they, among the many things that they do to make this project richer, is they help translate from local languages into the languages that I understand. So I speak a small number of languages. I've picked up survival level knowledge of several languages along the way, like Russian and Arabic. And I'm now trying to learn Mandarin, and I hope that by the time I reach the Russian border, I'll be able to have kind of rudimentary, simple conversations in Mandarin. But I need my walking partners to be, they're my windows into people's, not just culture, but into people's minds and hearts by translating long interviews, right? I stop in somebody's house, and if they are willing, I sit and talk to them for hours sometimes, writing down what they tell me with the help of my local walking partner translating.
Thank you for telling us that. All right, let's take a question from Ms. Huiz's class. We will ask you to unmute your microphone and you can send a student up to ask a question.
Awesome, thank you. Ben, can you ask your question?
Do I ask here?
Oh, you can come up here.
Hello, so my question is, do you ever have any problem crossing borders into different countries? Do you ever get like held up by border control or stuff like that?
Yes, that's another good logistical question. Yes, what I've said before when I talk to students or readers is the Stone Age people I'm following who are carrying spears and carrying fire and a horn to kind of start their meals, dinner at the end of the day under some shelter under a tree. Their big barriers were natural features like gigantic mountain ranges that they couldn't cross if they had glaciers on them in the wintertime, or seas, right? If you reach the edge of an ocean, you have to turn left or right. You can't go ahead. So they had their natural obstacles. my biggest obstacle is not natural anymore. In 2022, the biggest obstacle are borders, political borders, which it's kind of crazy, but they're imaginary lines. They don't really exist except in our minds, but they're also sometimes as tall and as unmovable as a giant Himalayan mountain range. If I don't get a visa to get into a country, I simply can't cross into that country. And on one occasion, I did have to actually, after months of trying to get into, for example, Iran, which is a very important country dealing with ancient human diasporas and human migrations, I finally had to throw in the towel and say, you know what, I've got to walk around Iran. And if you look on the map, Iran's a really big place. So it took quite a while to get around. But what I do to kind of justify it, and not to get depressed about it or get frustrated, although it is frustrating, of course, is, hey, that's life. If you're on foot around the world, if you set your mind too obsessively on the road ahead, and you kind of, if I can only walk through Iran, I can only walk through Iran, you're going to be, you're going to give up, frankly. So one of the lessons of the walk is probably a very old lesson from life going back to the Stone Ages. Hey, if this road doesn't work, you pivot and you take that road. And if that road doesn't work, you find a third way. You basically have to kind of problem solve your way across the world on foot.
All right, let's take another question. Sorry, let's take another question from Miss Lee's STEM class. We'll unmute your microphone and you can ask your question.
How many pairs of shoes did you have to change on your journey?
Well, I think it's about a dozen. I don't have the exact number. I started counting, but then I lost count, to be honest. So I can happily report that I'm on the same pair of feet, but I've been through probably hundreds of pairs of socks and at least a dozen pair of shoes. And if you want to know what shoes I wear, I'm not associated with the company, so I can do it with a fair conscience. I generally walk in Merrell's. There's a company called Merrell's that produces these really lightweight, very tough walking shoes, and they last me about up to 1,500 miles. They're tough.
Wow, thank you. Great question. So we have some YouTubers who are wondering, Paul, where do you rest? How often do you rest? How often do you stay in one place? Does that change nightly?
Yeah, it does. I would say one of the biggest changes to my life between the time before I started this project, this walking project, and the time since, is that I don't know what my day is going to be like. I never do. It is never, no 2 days are alike. And on the one hand, if you think about it in a kind of a negative way, that you could say, wow, that kind of is a drag because you can't plan, or you're disappointed, or you're always anxious because you don't know what's coming next. There's some of that I carry some of that psychological burden around. Like every other human being, I want some order in my universe. But on the other hand, I can't tell you guys how much a gift it's been to learn or be taught by the open road, to not get too obsessed with certainty, to be comfortable with uncertainty. Because if you can be comfortable with uncertainty, you can take a lot of the worry that's weighing you down, take it out of your pack, your psychological pack, and leave it beside the road and say goodbye to it. And you just feel lighter. And so what it does is it lends you freedom. It gives you freedom to say, you know what, I was hoping to make it to this destination today, but I'm either too tired, or the river's too high, or I met this interesting person along the way that took up too much, too much time it would be to interview her or to talk to her about, whatever she's doing in her life. And so the walk has been a great instructor of letting go of schedules that, when I look back, not only were unrealistic, like the original schedule about how long this walk would last, it was unrealistic, but also maybe even harmful to the basic idea of this project, which is to slow down enough to appreciate the world and basically be more awake, basically be more alive. I think I try to be a writer. That's what I call myself. And when I talk to writing students, they say, can you give us some tips about how to become a better writer? And one of the things that the walk has reinforced, I sort of knew it before the walk, but what the walk has reinforced is to write well, you basically have to live well. You have to be more awake than you were if you're not writing, because it's only when you're alert to what's happening inside of you and happening outside of you, around you, that you might be able to find stories that are important enough to share, that are meaningful. Right? So I don't know where I spend the night. I don't know. I have a general idea. I'm talking to Mr. like the guy on the snowy mountain, Yangwando, or Kankan Lui, the woman who was walking through those beautiful mountain conifer forests. We would say, where do you think we can get today? Well, let's aim for village X. But there's a mountain range in between. And if we don't get there, then what do? Well, we can camp, or we can find a shepherd's hut, or we can find a cafe along a lonely highway or whatever, and just spend the night there. And so being accepting of that kind of possibility, if you look at it as possibility rather than as a negative thing, is a gift that I hope I'll be able to take away from the walk after I hang up my boots in South America and get on with other things.
Thank you for that. Let's take another question from Miss Lee's STEM class. We'll unmute your microphone and you can send up a student.
Go ahead. What kind of cool animals you see?
I have seen wild rams with the big giant horns up in the Pamir Mountains, these amazing giant wild sheep that kind of bounce along the crests of mountains. They seem to defy gravity. I have seen some small animals, lots of deer. I've seen snakes. I've seen wild ostriches. I've seen wild antelope. I have seen hyena in Africa. But listen to me pause, listen to me go, what does that tell you? It tells you that I have not seen too much. And that's another discovery of the walk, is that it has been astonishing and sobering to see how much we've changed the world. Over the last 3,600 plus days and nights on the walking trail so far on my journey, the number of days when I've seen wild animals, and I'm excluding birds, right? Because I see birds every day, I see insects, I hear them every day. But like large megafauna, charismatic megafauna, is probably maybe 20 days of those 3,000 plus. That's how much we've impacted the natural environment of the planet we live on. And it's been an eye-opener, because I've walked to some very remote areas, walked through the Western Himalayas, I've walked through the deserts of Saudi Arabia, the deserts and steppes of Central Asia, the jungles of Southeast Asia. Yeah, we have transformed the world. And it's kind of shocking. And I think one of the things that walking does is it makes you aware of that. And it certainly, as a biologist by education, tells me how much work we still have ahead of us to try to stabilize a planet that is still reeling from our impact and from our appetites. Good question. We could spend a whole hour talking about this, but it's a great question. It's worth exploring.
Thank you for that. Let's take another question from Ms. Ruiz's class. We'll unmute your microphone and you can send your student up.
I have a question. What is one of the most impactful or inspiring things you have heard or seen on your journey?
Okay. You would think I would have a standard answer because it's a really good question. And I always I counter that with another kind of question is like how difficult it is, do you think it would be to kind of isolate, one thing out of what has basically turned into my life? What I would ask you, to be fair, is like, after the last 9 years of your life, what is the most astounding, inspiring thing that you experienced? I mean, you might be able to come back and answer with me something very specific, which I would congratulate you on. I think every day of this walk, to some degree or another, has been a discovery of something inspiring and magnificent. And my friends, what it usually involves for me, we're all put together differently. You would have a different walk if you did this, and I'm not encouraging you to do it. It's an extreme thing to do with your time. I would encourage you to incorporate it into your life in a way that enriches your life, but you don't have to go walking across the world to get the riches of walking and thinking. But the most inspiring thing of the last 9 years maybe has been the daily inspiration of people, of how people across language barriers, across ethnicity, across gender, across nationality, how the vast majority of them, their first instinct is a generous one. Their first instinct is kindness. And that's the fuel of inspiration that keeps me going. Because think about it, if I were somehow confronting negativity every day, or even once a week, or whatever time period, I wouldn't have much incentive to continue. I mean, I think I would get tired of it. I'd get tired of being rejected. I'd get tired of kind of being looked at out of the corner of the eye in a suspicious way. I would be tired of not being treated kindly. I would give up. I would have given up a long time ago. The fact that I'm still kind of like, I'm way over what I thought this walk would last. I thought it would last 7 years. I'm 9 years in, and I'm roughly like halfway through. The reason I'm still at it and why it's exciting me and why I think it's still worth my life to devote my days to this is because of people. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. My destination isn't really Tierra del Fuego. That's what I tell, maybe my editors, or I tell my readers, but really what I try to tell my readers somewhere in my stories is that my destination, and by extension, all of our destinations, are other people. We're walking to each other, whether we realize it or not, because we cannot survive without each other. And that's another lesson of the walk, is just how dependent we are on each other. And I'm dependent on people every single day of this journey. And so far, they have come through. So it's a very affirming, it's a very positive engine of the walk. Good question.
That's really beautiful. And I think it kind of leads us into the last question that we usually ask our explorers on Explorer Classroom is, what general advice do you have for the young explorers out there that they can take from this and, provide in their own lives?
I think, what I do is write. I'm somebody who deals with words. That's what motivates me. I take photographs, I shoot video. I have interactions with many different kinds of people. I see, to some degree, the walk has become kind of a bridge between people. I hope it has, of different backgrounds in a world that's becoming, in some cases, very divided. So I think if there's anything that I would hope readers would take away from my storytelling is to have compassion and to take your time to reach compassion and not be too hard on yourself. Be compassionate with yourself, not just others. There's a great essayist, a guy named Barry Lopez, who ends one of his stories with something like, all that holds us together are stories and compassion. And that with enough attention, with enough care, there is nothing that cannot be retrieved. And I think those ideas are deeply embedded into the walk. And I hope that they come across storytelling, not just of me, but my walking partners. And I think we need that kind of understanding, that kind of empathy across all these barriers that divide us. I think we're going to need it to get through a pretty tough century ahead. And it's going to be you guys on this call, younger people, who are going to walk ahead. You know, my generation will be waving to you, wishing you luck, but you're going to have to carry the journey forward. I think as long as you're empathetic and compassionate, we'll be okay. We'll at least be better. So that's the main lesson I hope comes through.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to join us. I know it's late where you are, so we so appreciate your time and everything that you've shared with us today. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. It's always great. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to ask questions, you know, there are ways to do that in writing. The website has an email which we welcome educators and learners to send messages to. I do answer everything that comes in. It might take me a little while, but I do answer it. So eager to hear from you, eager to connect again somewhere down the trail in China or beyond. So let's stay in touch.
Yes, and thank you so much, students, for your thoughtful questions, and thank you to the teachers for making this happen for your classrooms. And as Paul said, you can continue to follow his storytelling at outofeldenwalk.org. We'll drop that into the chat in YouTube and here in Zoom. And teachers, be sure to visit learn.outofeldenwalk.org to dive into more exciting learning opportunities for your students. I hope you join many more of our events here on Explorer Classroom. Next week, we'll be right back here on our regular schedule with Explorer Frederic Farden to teach about the superpowers of mangrove forests. So we have another exciting event for you. You can register your student group for a shout out during the event or a chance to be up here on screen with us at natgeoed.org/Explorer Classroom. I hope everyone has a lovely day. For you, Paul, a good evening, and stay curious, keep exploring. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time. You can turn your microphones on and say bye to Paul.